I know this is really hard for you, and I love you very much, but it's going to be okay. Big kiss goodbye, and that's confident disinterest. So you acknowledge the feeling, you boost them up, you give them some love, and you send them on the way. So talk about feelings, develop confident disinterest in the right scenarios, and look after yourself.
Welcome to the Grateful Podcast with Jack Wagoner, where each and every week we explore what it takes to live a life full of purpose and gratitude. I'm your host, Jack Wagoner, and I am a deep believer in what I call the duality of gratitude and relentless action toward your goals. That's where we can feel grateful for what we have in this moment right now while pursuing something bigger and better in the future. And that's the way I like to live, and that is what we talk about here on the Grateful Podcast. The Grateful Podcast with Jack Wagoner presents. Subscribe. Today's guest, Deborah Armstrong Branch, is a specialist nurse from England who works with kids aged 0 to 6. She spent years helping parents navigate the complexities of child development and really has a lot of knowledge about what it takes to create a strong and resilient kid. In this episode, we explore the emotional blueprint that gets set in childhood, how attachment styles, parenting choices, and even unspoken pressures shape the way we process emotions, even as adults. We'll talk about why trying to keep kids constantly happy can actually do more harm than good, the dangers of overparenting, and how social media is creating unrealistic expectations for parents today. Deb also shares why emotional intelligence starts long before a child can even talk, and what parents can do to foster resilience, self-regulation, and healthy emotional expression. If you're a parent, future parent, or a kid who's just curious about how childhood shapes who you go on to be in the rest of your life, this episode is packed with amazing insights that will change the way you think about your emotions and mental health. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Grateful Podcast, Deb. Thanks for coming on.
No problem. Lovely to see you.
All right, so today I was reading what you've put on your Instagram, actually, and one of your recent things, you said that encouraging children to always be happy can be a mistake. Mm-hmm. Why is this so important?
I think, if you read the Instagram post, I was that mum. And I think what I've learned through working with children in my current role, when most of my work is around helping little ones express the feelings. If you're saying to a child, I just want you to be happy all the time, then they feel this massive pressure not to be anything but happy, if that makes sense. And then even from really, 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 really small, children start to work out what adults want of them, and they'll adapt to that. So if you're telling a little one to be happy all the time, they very soon lose the ability to express other emotions because they know that won't please you as their parent or their teacher. Or so that's why, and I think we're really bad at expressing our emotions anyway. My generation, I don't know about your generation, Jack, but my generation and the parents I normally work with, who are usually in the 20s and the 30s, are really bad at that. In the UK anyway, in my little kind of corner of the UK, it's not great.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. So like the expression of emotions is something that other generations haven't quite figured out, and so they project their misunderstanding of it onto their children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's about tolerating your child's distress, really. It's about being able to, like I always say to parents, it's like you're scaffolding them. So when they feel out of control in whatever big emotion that they're feeling, you need to be their safe space. And by pushing away the negative emotion, it's not safe, because then they learn to adapt so that you feel safe rather than they feel safe, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get that. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like my generation struggles a lot emotionally.
Really?
I think that I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's social media, if it's the way we were raised. But I was really interested to get your perspective on how the first, like, because you specialize in the first 6 years of
Hmm.
a kid's life, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, how the emotional well being of a kid from the ages 0 to 6 affects their emotional well being throughout the rest of their life.
Dear me, I could talk all day about it. So it starts in the womb. It starts in the womb. So when you're pregnant with a baby, um, all of your emotions, the baby feels them, and it triggers all sorts of different hormones. And so, for instance, this is a one fact I remember from teaching. If you have massive amounts of stress around week, I think it's 14, then the fetus secretes something called lipase, which makes them more prone to obesity as an adult. And that's kind of just within the womb. But once the little one pops out, have you heard of attachment theory, Jack? Have you ever heard of that?
No.
So it's a really, really it was kind of coined in the 1960s by a guy called John Bowlby, and then later on in the 70s, a lady called Mary Ainsworth did these experiments called the stranger situation, and what they looked at was the separation between a child and its mum, and it was they did it on kids that were 18 months old, um, and what they looked at was how the child was when you left them and they were all alone, how the child was when you left them and with a stranger, and how the child was when you returned to them. And from that experiment, and I think they did 2,000 children, so it wasn't small, it was really large, they found that there's three attachment styles. So number one is secure, so it means that when I was talking about containing your child in that kind of emotion, that's a secure attachment. So you would know that your mum or dad or your main carer has your back. No matter what, you can always go to them. They expect nothing of you in return for their love. So that's secure attachment. And only 47% of the population have that attachment style. It's more than average, but not predominant. The next one is an avoidant attachment style, which means that when you were little, your needs weren't really met. So you probably weren't played with, you weren't spoken to, so what you learnt was to be self-sufficient. So you learn, this is my saddest attachment style. Nobody's coming to rescue you, so you just get on. And the last one is an ambivalent attachment style, which means that your parent is sometimes available and sometimes not. So what you learn is that in order to get your parents' attention, you need to create a fuss in some way, shape, or form. And none of them, so the two that I mentioned at the end, it doesn't mean that you had a terrible childhood or anything. It just means that that was the relationship that you had with your parent. And that initial relationship, the blueprint, sets you in your blueprint for relationships for the rest of your life. I know
That's
you'll have to go and read
fascinating.
about it when I come off because it's so massive. It's too big to. So I'll send you some stuff if you like, Jack.
Okay, I would love that. Yeah.
And there's another one which is a mixture of them all, and that's if a child has been abused, and that's far out on the other spectrum. But yeah, so that's kind of, so if you can think of that person with the different attachment styles, so if you're an avoidant person and nobody's ever come to meet your needs, then you're going to bottle all your feelings up and you're never going to tell anybody, and that can lead to like obviously mental health conditions. And does that make sense?
So it does. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's fascinating. One I
Mm,
want to touch on more was you talked about the ambivalent
yeah,
attachment
yeah,
style and how like a child had to adapt to get their parents' attention. They thought they had to do something special
yeah,
almost. Do you think that that is where a lot of people pleasers come from?
absolutely, definitely. It's often linked to parents who've maybe had a mental health condition or maybe misused substances, or even I think now that would be in the extremes. But I think now, doing the job I've done for the last 10 years, I think it's because we're so busy. I think so. I don't know, what your experience is. I know your mum ran her own business. I saw that on the podcast, and it's nobody's fault. I'm parent 3 kids, worked full time. I didn't have enough space and time, and I wonder if that's the cause for the emotional difficulties in your age group, Jack, because we are definitely the first generation of parents that have had to do it all, like all. And I wonder yeah.
Right. Like it's no longer normal to have a stay-at-home parent.
I don't think so. Do you?
I don't think so either. I wonder if that's different across like cultures. We're both in like, although we live in different countries, I think the culture of the UK and the US are fairly similar. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. That because there's less time allocated towards children at this young age, they realize that they have to behave in a certain way, or even if that's not true, they've come to the understanding that in order to get more attention, they have to behave in an attention-seeking manner.
Yeah. And that could be the really, really good, or the really, really naughty, or the really, like, or the really, really sad, or the really, really anxious. And we can imagine how hard my job is when parents come to me with a child that's acting out, and actually
Hmm.
I have to turn the spotlight onto the parent on the whole. So it's not always gratefully received, to be fair.
Right. Um, I think you mentioned that like a parent's characteristics are often reflected in their child's behavior, right? So, like if a child's acting out, that's probably a result of their parenting style, right?
More than likely, yeah, more than likely. Unless, sometimes I come across children who have an underlying diagnosis. But
Hmm.
on the whole, it's usually to do with the environment that they're in.
Yeah. I so I know some people like I know one kid I'm thinking of in particular who I've always wondered if he was just born in a way to act out more, or if it was the way he was parented. Because I know his parents and they're very nice, but you wouldn't necessarily expect him to behave in the way he does. But these behaviors have been prevalent since he was very young. So, how much does like this question of nature versus nurture, is it very dependent on like specific situations, or what characteristics make up this conversation?
Have you heard of a concept called temperament?
No.
Temperament. So your temperament, you're born with an innate temperament. So, um, and then the world comes along, and your personality is a result of you interacting your temperament with the world. Have you heard of Dan Siegel, Dr. Dan Siegel?
I have heard of him, yeah.
Yeah, he's just kind of talked about this. I've been using temperament as part of my clinical practice for years, but he's just done a big, massive study on it. So I suppose it could be something as simple as, so I'll use myself. I'm quite I'm an introvert, but I'm quite a loud introvert, and I'm quite confident. I've got a little girl, well, she's 16 now, and at home she was a very confident 3-year-old, jazz hands, singing. So I presumed that her temperament was the same as me. So I pushed her into all sorts of after school activities without a single thought, really. And then she developed she developed some quite obsessive behaviours. Like she had to have her toys lined up in a certain way. She would take everything out of her doll's house and make little rooms in every room in my house. I'd open the curtains, it'd be a bathroom behind me curtains in the dining room. And what I now know, but I didn't know that then, was that was her way of managing her anxiety about kind of the pressure I was putting on her to be this extroverted child. So I think we do it with most parents do what they do with all good intent. I never once thought that what I was doing was making her unhappy. It was just in retrospect. Like I can look back and she can look back and tell me why she was like that.
No one wants to be a bad parent.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. And hindsight's a marvelous thing, isn't it? If you speak to your mum, nothing she'll have done would have been everything. She can look back and you think, oh my goodness, why did I do that? But you're right. There's not many people who want to be a bad parent.
Right. I think what you said about hindsight is it's so true. I think about that in my life in so many different like areas where if only I knew what I knew now. I think that my next question for you is if we like collectively gather what we've learned throughout our experiences and in hindsight and can make that knowledge more readily available to the public and people are more knowledgeable about the best practices, I do you think that would just make society so much better if we knew more about how to raise emotionally intelligent kids? I think that would be huge for society.
I think it would be absolutely massive. I think part of that as well, Jack, is helping children understand who they are, so emotionally know who they are. And I think because if you know who you are, then you follow a path that's true to you, and then you're less likely, I would imagine, to have significant mental health conditions when you're older. That's my so I I've only recently realised. So my daughter's pretty clever, really clever, but she wants to go and do drama. And I know the internal voice in my head is, drama, it's not academic enough. She's not going to get a degree, blah, 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 blah. And I would have said that 10 years ago. But now I swallow all of that society's told me is the right thing for my child to do. And I say, whatever makes you happy. But I don't think that's the norm in society. Do you?
I don't think so. I think that parents like to put the pressures that their parents put on them when they were younger on their own kids. So if what I've observed is that it takes a lot of effort to break the mold of like you need to go get a degree or you need to go do this to in your life if you weren't told that as a kid.
Yeah. And that's research based actually, Jack, what you've just said, because if in order to change the way you parent away from how you were parented is really hard, really hard, really hard. You've got to be quite pretty self-aware, really.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the goal in parenting, right? Create a better generation, a better kid than you are yourself. I interviewed my dad not that long ago, and he said that like his goal with with me and my sister was to like create himself with better qualities, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful, I think.
Yeah, it is. It's lovely. And I think I've got 3 children, and I always call my first one my guinea pig because I didn't really know what I was doing.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting actually is my youngest child, who I felt like I was the most relaxed with, and I didn't really feel the pressure of society because by then I was older. It was my 3rd child. I was too busy actually to really think carefully about a lot of my parenting. She's the most steady of the 3 actually, and I wonder if there's a lot of the work I'm doing at the minute is thinking about how much have we overparented as well.
Can you talk about that a little bit, overparenting?
So kind of have you heard of snowplow parents and helicopter parents? Have you heard those phrases before?
Yeah.
So it's that type of, so it's the same the way that social media might put pressure on a young person to be look a certain way, act a certain way. There's a lot of that social media pressure on mums as well, on parents. So you've got all this pressure to. I was at a meeting the other day, so I teach pregnant women about the emotions of the unborn baby. And they were talking about all the new things they have to do as a pregnant mum. And they were talking about harvesting colostrum. So it's the fore milk that you have before you breastfeed that leaks out of you before the baby comes. And they were getting test tubes and scooping it up and keeping it in the fridge. I was like, how on earth have you got enough time to think about that? Like, that's just an expectation that, to me, is totally unrealistic. So society's telling you that you have to be this kind of parent, and then you try and do it, and then you end up as being a snowplow parent where you produce a child at the other end who has never known adversity. So when that adversity comes, which it ultimately always will, they're just not prepared for it. So
I'm smiling because I think a lot of times an older generation will say that like the newer generation is weak, or like they're lazy. But what you just described is basically placing the blame on the parenting. So every generation might become more, or my generation in particular might become more less prone to like succeed in adverse situations, but that's because there weren't adverse situations in our childhood. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And it's very difficult, I think, as a parent when you can prevent that happening for your child. It's very hard not to step in, because that's being a good parent. So I'm not blaming any parents, because I've done all of these things that I'm talking about as a mum. I just think I've got the knowledge to know why I did it and what the implications of it has been, and I can see that reflected in my children, and I can see it reflected in society as well. I suppose what we're talking about is the new generations of parents, aren't we?
Yeah, kind of, because you said like social media like will encourage these parents to do these crazy things where it's like, I mean, my guess is you disagree, that you don't think that that's where the like effort should be going.
No, I think the effort should be going to making sure that if we talk about a pregnant mum, she should be resting. She should be chilling, probably can't because she's probably working full time, but you certainly shouldn't be worried about collecting milk that actually will go in the back of the fridge, and you'd be lucky if you remember it, because by the time the newborn's there, you haven't even got time to have a shower, and a mum in the modern day needs to look after them, and a dad. It depends on how hands-on the everybody is, but I think all if you're in a good place, then your children will be in a good place, is what I kind of come to the conclusion of after all these years of working with families.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to go back to the adversity thing because I found that fascinating. What do you think because it's a balance, right? You don't want a child from like 0 to 6 years old to have a extremely difficult life that's going to set them up for failure, but you also don't want them to get everything they always want for. Like a spoiled kid won't realize that he has to work for things. So what have you found like the balance is in creating hardworking, ambitious, and independent teenagers and adults?
I think it's things like allowing children to sort things out for themselves within their ability. So we kind of advocate something called persistence coaching. So you've got even as young as 3, and the baby's building a tower and it keeps falling down. Instead of saying, "Oh, I'll do it for you," then you would say, "Come on, you can do it. You can do it. Come on, you're really clever. You can do it." And it's things like So if you've got a child that's struggling to separate from you going into nursery or going into school, it's your job as a parent to say, you're going to be absolutely fine. Come on, give us a big kiss and a cuddle. I know that you're sad, but come on, mum will be here or dad will be here at the end of the day. So it's developing independence through, I suppose, telling them that they're capable of things. Because the more you tell them, the more you intervene in the tiny little things, the more they're going to think they can't do that. And I see a lot of that at work, like in my job. Parents in, I can't send them to school, they can't cope, they're screaming and they're crying. But you're not really doing them any favours by not sometimes pushing them into situations they don't want to be in. With understanding and kindness, not just shoving them in.
Right. There's a balance between like shoving a kid in some uncomfortable situation and just expecting them to get through it all by themselves, or like encouraging them they can do it beforehand. And that's where the real key piece is.
Yeah. And providing them with ways to soothe themselves. So we would suggest like they'd use something like, we would call it a transition object, but all that might be would be a teddy bear that smells of home, or sometimes mums will like get a pebble off the beach and draw a heart on it and they'll take the little pebble in it. So it's teaching them from really young, like self-soothing, like ways to make themselves feel better. But they can't self-soothe until they're like probably 6+. So they might look like they are, but it's what they're learning, because a part of the brain that has that ability doesn't develop till you're 25 actually, but not at all till you're about 6.
That's really interesting. Another thing I really wanted to touch on is that in my life, my earliest memories are ones of extreme emotion, whether that's good emotion, anguish, joy, fear. Why is it that those small moments of deep emotion at such a young age left such a deep imprint on my life? Why is it that young kids, those memories of deep emotion as a young kid, like stay with you for so long?
I mean, I don't really know, to be honest. I know that your brain develops, so in a very basic way, you kind of come as a blank canvas into this world. But as you have not even big, as you have interactions with people, something in your brain called synapses connect, and they build skills and memories, but everything that, even though you only remember the big things, all the little things would have been doing all that work underneath. But you're right, you do tend to remember the big moments of the big emotions, don't you? But I don't know why. I know it's all stored in your hippocampus, but I don't exactly know why, to be honest, Jack.
Yeah, that's okay. I think that was a good start of an answer. I really respect when people like say that they don't know the full answer. You know what I mean?
No,
I think that's a
I'm not a
respectable trait.
neurologist, so
Yeah,
yeah, I don't know.
I get that was a question a little maybe outside your expertise. It's one that I'm super curious about though.
Yeah, Dan Siegel. Go and read Dan Siegel. He's got a
Okay,
book called The Whole Brain Child, and I'm sure it'll have it in there.
okay, I'll check him out. Um, so how can parents help kids process emotions like anger and frustration in a healthy way that will lead them to processing those emotions in a healthy way when they're older? I think I see so many people that really struggle with processing those emotions, those hard emotions, you know what I mean? Of
Yeah.
anger and frustration and even like sadness. People really struggle to sit with those emotions that don't feel good. So how does the way we approach these emotions as a kid affect the way we do it later in life?
I think the biggest thing you can do for your child to help them process emotions healthily is help them develop an emotional vocabulary of words, because we don't have many. Adults don't have many. So I used to teach, well, I still use this skill, but when I remember teaching foster carers and asking them to name as many emotion words as they could, and they knew about 10, and we're talking about, like grown adults, and I embarrassingly couldn't think of any more than them either. So what we know is if a child has a word to describe an emotion, then they will use a word rather than an action. So with really little ones, so say you've got a 2-year-old who's having a temper tantrum, which is totally normal because they can't have a cookie before dinner, you might say to them, I can see you're really angry and that's okay, but you're not having a cookie. Do you want a cuddle? So you name the emotion, you tell them that you understand why they've got that emotion, and then you offer comfort. And you also name emotions in yourself. So the mum in that situation might say, it's really frustrating to me that you're crying, but that's okay. I'll just take a deep breath and it'll be okay. So you kind of narrating the language of feelings and how it feels in your body, and also helping them with empathy. So you might say they snatch a toy off a friend, and you say, you've made your friend very, very sad because you've took their toy. So you're making, so what I say to parents is you make talking about feelings part of everyday life. It's just maybe around the dinner table on an evening, you say, what made you happiest today? What made you saddest today? So that's the best way we can help children to eventually manage their emotions. But part of that is also allowing them to express their emotions. So you never say, don't be angry, don't be scared. You say, I can see that you are. So I suppose it's opening up that, and that's hard, isn't it, if you've never been taught how to feel emotions or express emotions. So you're making it kind of not a taboo subject, I suppose.
Right. Yeah, like normalize feeling emotions and normalize like talking about them instead of making it something that you avoid, I guess.
Can you imagine kind of teenagers who have mental health problems, if they could just go to somebody and say, because they've been taught the whole life that it's all right to say, I'm sad. Can you imagine the difference that would make if if you had a friend who wasn't very happy, who could just say, Jack, I'm having a really hard time here. Like, I'm really sad. Or it would just, it's the talking, isn't it? They always say it's the talking that makes a difference.
Yeah, that would be incredible. Because I think we live in a culture where people feel bad to feel bad.
Yeah.
Part of that might be social media. I mean, you look on it and no one's posting themselves feeling badly. I mean, why would you want to? But we have this idea that everyone around us is feeling so good all the time, and so we're not normal if we are experiencing emotional discomfort. And so what you just described, where like having a childhood where you were constantly made aware that it's okay to not feel great in a moment, I think that's huge.
It's huge, it is. It's absolutely huge. I think, and it makes me really sad when you said right at the beginning of our conversation that your generation aren't great with emotions, because my hope was that I've come from a stoical, my parents stoical kind of, I was hoping that things had evolved, but that makes me really sad to think that it hasn't really changed.
I think that things have changed. I just don't know how much better things are, if that makes sense. I think that emotions have definitely become more normalized, and I think we're on our way to a better path. Like, we're on the right path, and on our way to a better future, but we're not there yet. I think we have a lot of work to do as a
Mm.
society.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I'm learning today is that that work really starts before you can even talk and
Yeah.
before you, yeah, while your brain's still developing in those early ages.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I like to say to mums and dads is that it's not hard. You don't have to be super mum or super dad. You just have to listen, really, and talk. But I suppose that can be really, really hard, can't it? But you don't have to be all singing, all dancing. You don't have to have the best car seat, the best, the best holidays, the best bedroom. It's got nothing to do with the material stuff at all. But unfortunately, that all that stuff is shoved in parents' faces, I think, and makes them feel less than a lot of the time.
I feel like what you've described a lot today is this almost in parenting, this duality of kindness while also like setting boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's so hard. Um, I mean, I try to keep that same idea of like being kind to myself and setting boundaries for myself. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
just a balance that not even just in parenting, just in life is so incredibly difficult to
Very.
find equilibrium in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you have any insight into how to best like balance the two of those to make a kid feel like to be kind to a kid while also not being too, I guess, soft?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll what I've seen a lot in my career is that if you don't put a boundaries in for children, they'll make their own. So they will refuse to get ready for bed, or they will refuse to leave for school, or they'll they'll make sure that the number of parents I've met who say he's the boss, the child's the boss, they're in control. So if you don't do it, you you're not really doing them any favors. So when I teach parents, I'll say, imagine you've got a pair of scales, and on this side's love, and on this side's routines and boundaries, and they need to be equal. Um, and I, as a mum, was not good at routines and boundaries. I'll hold my hand up because I didn't want my children not to like me, and there lies the problem, because you're not your children's friend. You're their scaffolder and their container. You're not the friend, and I think that's a really big problem. But I think a good way to do it, in hindsight again, is to think about what am I learning my child in this moment. So by, say, making your child go into school when they're crying with comfort and kindness, like we said, you're saying, I believe in you, there's nothing scary in that school, I believe that you can do this. If you don't send them into school, what you're saying is, I don't believe you can do this, and it is frightening in that school because I'm not going to let you go in. So it's about kind of, I suppose, as a parent thinking, how do I want my little person to be when they leave me, when they're not with me anymore? How do I want them to survive in the world? So what skills can I give them that'll help them thrive? And maybe that's a good way of looking at it. So you don't feel like, so if your child's crying for a toy, when you say no in a shop, if you say no, you're not being mean. You're learning them that they can't have what they want all the time. That's what you're learning them. So I wonder if that's I think that's probably a good way of looking at it. You're their teacher, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah. Because yeah, you're right. You can't have what you want all the time. That's so unrealistic.
No.
And to grow up thinking that I can get anything I want by crying and acting out, that's a horrible lesson to reinforce. Even if you have to weigh, would I rather my child think that he can get anything he wants by crying and love me or
Mm-hmm.
like me or whatever like
Mm-hmm.
that battle you have in your head is, or do I want them to grow up independent and strong and
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Fascinating.
Yeah. There's a psychologist called Michelle Chalfont, and she talks about being a parent. It's like taking your child to the bowling alley with the 10-pin bowling, and you have the sides up when they're little so that the ball doesn't go, and then as they get older you move them away because eventually you don't have any guardrails for them, they're just gone. And if they're not ready, that's not nice for them, is it? You're not doing them any favors, really.
If you're enjoying this episode of the Grateful Podcast, I would very much appreciate it if you could either share this podcast episode with friends and family, or kindly leave a review down below on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. It would help me be able to make this podcast better for you and better for all my other listeners. Thank you. Enjoy the show. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's crazy. I think it's amazing how all of that starts from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I know that our neuroplasticity is at its highest when we're youngest, and so
Mm-hmm.
I think parenting and just building a good life is really all about investment. The more effort you put in up front, the easier it'll be on the back end.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, yeah, that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. But I don't think society sets it up to be that easy, really, does it? The pressures that the adults have, and I don't think it's, in theory, it's great, but in reality, that's why when I do the work that I do, I'm really compassionate, because I know what I'm not. I don't think anybody doesn't want to do the best for the child, but sometimes you don't have the tools to do it with. If that's the case, you just have to be kind to yourself as a parent, because it's the hardest job you'll ever do. So it's all right knowing all this stuff, but just as anything, you can know everything, but you can't always do everything.
That's huge. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You can know it all, but that doesn't mean you'll actually do it.
No, you might not be able to.
Yeah. So what made you choose to study this and do this?
Well, I'm a paediatric nurse by trade. Yeah. So I've always loved children. And then I trained to be a health visitor. Do you have health visitors in America? I don't think you do.
I honestly don't know.
No.
Not. Yeah, I'm not sure.
So a health visitor, you visit a child from birth to 5. So you have regular visits, have a caseload. So I started off doing that after I trained to be a paediatric nurse, and I did this. Just got sent on a course, a 3-day course called Solihull training, which was all around baby brain development and attachment. And that was 13, no, that's more. That was about 20 years ago. And I'm quite a deep person. So I knew that understanding why was much more important in terms of working with children and families than just telling them what to do. That doesn't work. It just doesn't work. You need to be able to connect to somebody. People don't do as they're told, do they? Not very often.
No, that's
So
very
I think
true.
I'm just very passionate about, I don't know how, I'm just very passionate about kindness, I suppose. I think that's the top and bottom of it. And I've met I've met people going through all sorts of difficulties in my career: domestic violence, drugs and alcohol, homelessness, poverty. And I do think that if you show people compassion and kindness, then they've got a lot more hope of pulling themselves through and being a better parent than punitive punitive kind of measures. So I think that's where it kind of all comes from. That I waffled,
Just
don't I?
wanting to bring more kindness into the world.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. When I was a little girl, my nana was, which is like my dad's mum, was a Christian, and I'm not necessarily religious, but I'm quite spiritual. But I know that was I went to church with her every week up until I was 10, and I know that's had a massive impact on us in hindsight. Not through my life, I haven't known that, but now I can look back and think, all right, okay, that's where all this came from.
In what way?
I suppose wanting to help people, wanting to be kind, um, wanting to show compassion for people, not judging, not thinking just because somebody's in a terrible situation, maybe he's an alcoholic or a drug addict, that they're a bad person. That's not, or they're not capable of being a parent, because they're just in a bad situation.
Right. I think that as humans, we take what we see at face value oftentimes.
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to dig into someone's story and understand the reasons behind their actions. But in your line of work, you must have so much compassion for someone. If you see someone that's, like, for example, addicted to drugs or an abuser, you can be like, oh, I wonder what they went through at a young age that
Mm-hmm.
caused them to be this way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's part of my assessment. So I'll do a massive assessment and work out where it's all come from. And unfortunately, it's always childhood usually.
Yeah. So yeah, like putting the work into your kids like in those early years, and because it makes a difference. It makes a difference down the road.
But the work into you as well.
Right.
As a parent, look after yourself. That would be my biggest piece of advice for parents. Put your own oxygen mask on first, which is very counterintuitive as a parent.
Do you think what's the biggest misunderstanding you think that society has on like either parenting in early childhood or the effects of early childhood on adulthood? I just think it's something we overlook a lot of times, and I'm wondering, like, in your career, do you have anything big that you've learned or any like realized misconceptions that we have about it?
I think we've touched on some of them today. To be successful, you have to be clever and academic. I think that's a big misconception, and that puts a lot of stress and strain on children. I've seen lots of children like 6 who have got anxiety because of pressures in school, and I think also I don't know whether this is global or if it's just kind of the UK, but the kind of presumption that if you're a parent, particularly a mum, that you have to sacrifice yourself for your children. So if you do anything for yourself, that you're selfish. I think that's a huge misconception, because it's the opposite. But I know, yeah, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. When my youngest was about 12, I started to have a little bit more time for myself, and I wrote a list on my phone that just said, who am I? Because I'd forgot who I was, because all I was doing was working and bringing up children, and I was exhausted, and all of a sudden I had a bit of time, and I thought, I've literally done nothing for myself as Deborah since my first child was born, and I can see how detrimental that was to me as a mum. But that's what society told me I should be doing. So I think that's probably my biggest.
You made your life parenting and work, but you forgot about yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think growing up, one of the biggest things in most influential things in my life has been seeing both of my parents go after things that really light them up,
Yeah.
and make that transition as well. Like, especially my dad, he was not always in a position doing a job that he loved to do, um, and made a lot of sacrifices. But once I started to see them both go after what really lit them up, it made me and my sister understand that, like, that's the big, when you go after what lights you up, you
Hmm.
bring joy into other people's lives as well.
Yeah.
That was a huge thing for me. I think parents might forget that they're setting an example for their children on how to
Yeah.
live.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we do, there's kind of a saying, children don't do what they hear, they do what they see. So the model, I've had so many parents say it's like putting a mirror up to myself, watching what my children do. So you're absolutely right, Jack. And I think alongside that, I don't know whether it's still the case, but there used to be, well, I think it is still the case. You're guilty. You feel guilty if you're a mum and you work, and you feel guilty if because you're leaving your children. But I think that if you're fulfilled in whatever you're doing, that is much more beneficial as being a stop-at-home mum and being unhappy. So I think it's it's inspirational for your children, isn't it, to see you thrive?
Yeah, 100%.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, all right. I'm going off topic a little bit here, and I
Okay.
know, I know that I told you I'd asked this question before, but I think I'm super interested in Buddhism and Eastern
Me too.
philosophy, and I like a lot of the books I read. I'm just looking around my room right now, like Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse.
Mm,
That's been a huge book for me. Thich Nhat Hanh, Being
yeah.
Peace, and they talk a lot about this concept of child's mind, where um, they philosophize that through repeated experience, the novelty of the world gets dulled, and that we should attempt to regain wonder by imagining that this is the first time we're seeing someone or
Mm-hmm.
something. And as someone with work that works with young kids, I'm wondering, like, do you feel that children do innately have this wonder, this fascination because they're seeing things for the first time, or yeah, they haven't
Yeah.
been worn down by the world?
Yeah, I think so. You know when I noticed it the most? So I go into schools and I do school observations if children are struggling. And it was just, so I've done thousands of them. Um, and after the pandemic, the very first school observation I did was in a nursery full of 3-year-olds. And normally you do a school observation in a nursery with full of 3-year-olds and it's chaotic as it should be. Everybody's running around, there's glitter glue. And after the pandemic, so we all went back in the September and it was like the first week of nursery school. And I went in and all the children were sitting separately on the carpet. Nobody was talking to each other and nobody was playing with each other. It was like something out of a horror film, to be honest. And I suppose what I'm talking about that for is because those children hadn't had the ability, the access to that exploration that children have. So all of that wonder and all of that amazement had been taken away from them. So isn't that
Interesting.
interesting that even though the children, they're still like an if they're not if they don't have access to that exploration, they end up like an adult and subdued. And so I wonder if it's about the child or it's about. So I'm thinking about the brain development, but I wonder if it's more about what situation you're in. So if you're an adult, like your mum who's gone and pursued her passion, I wonder how much more joyful and childlike she is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know what you're saying.
Do you know
In
what I mean?
comparison to someone that just went, got a degree, works in front of a computer every day, and doesn't
Mhm.
really do
Mhm.
anything that lights them up.
Mhm. So I
Yeah.
think children do see the world without any shackles on it, but they need to be given those opportunities. And I think screens, I could get right on my high horse about screens and how that's impacting children's childlike wonder.
I would love for you to talk about that a little bit.
Well, you learn through play. So you learn everything through play. You learn communication, you learn movement, you learn everything. And I've met children in the last few years who don't make eye contact, don't have any social skills, and but can download Microsoft Word on a laptop for you, and but I met a little one not so long ago who the sandpit in his nursery, they thought he had disabilities because there was like a step up into the sandpit. He didn't know how to lift his leg over this 10 centimetre high sandpit. He'd never been outside really until he went to nursery. So screens and I was listening to something the other day that said that because they're watching things, they're not and they're losing. I think I said something on Instagram the other day. They're losing the imagination, the creativity, the ability to creatively think about things. And I don't know about when you were little, but when mine were little, would make islands. Would get all the settee cushions off and make islands and tents and out of the clothes horse. And I don't know whether children do that anymore. I don't know. I don't know if
You
they
said in a
do.
quote the other day, in a world that doesn't leave space for independent thought, where does that leave creation, invention, autonomy, and imagination?
Sounds good,
That really
doesn't
struck that it does sound good, right? Um, uh, that really, really describes well what you just said, I think. Like
it?
we yeah, there's no space for these kids to do these fun things. They're stuck to the screen. This is the new world. I I don't want to imagine the consequences that'll have down the road.
No, no. And I think, you know, I'm a yoga teacher and I do a lot of like meditation and breathing but I've only been doing that since lockdown. I was so going a little bit crazy in the house all the time. So I thought, and I was working online with children under 5. I thought I've got to find some way to free my brain. But the difference that has made to have some space and some quietness is enormous. But I don't know when children get that. Well, like that post I did was my daughter saying that she'd been up all night because she it was the only time she got to think. It's really scary.
I struggle with that too. I mean, I try to block out time in my day where I meditate most mornings.
Mm-hmm.
I find that my brain works wonders after I like go on a walk with no AirPods in.
Yeah,
I can just talk or think to
yeah.
myself. But I definitely have been struggling with sleep, um, because it's so on all the time. There's never
Mm.
a pause in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And so you finally get to sleep, and I feel like our brains just have to vent a little bit, let a
Mm-hmm.
little out,
Mm-hmm.
process. But it's impacting our sleep because it's the only time we're really like thinking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's really not good for the developing brain, is it? For children, it's really, really not good. I have people messaging us on Instagram about asking us about screen time for 2-year-olds, and
2-year-olds?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
What? A
yeah,
2-year-old using a screen?
yeah,
That's
yeah.
crazy.
And I have to be very careful what I say because you don't want to be judge. You don't want to judge people, do you? But yeah, I just it's not good.
What do you think's gonna happen? Yeah, what are the solutions, I guess? Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think we can stop it. I think it's on a roll now. I don't. I I think there should be some way of switching screens off completely for portions of the day, like some kind of like Wi-Fi ban, or I don't know, because I don't think, because it's so addictive, isn't it? So parents have to cope with children having huge tantrums when they're taking screens off them, and some parents don't have the capacity to put in them limits. So sometimes I think there needs to be something in place that can do it for them, but I don't think it'll get better, if I'm honest, which sounds really, really sad, doesn't it?
Yeah. I wonder if it's kind of a cop-out for parents as well. I mean, if your kid's acting up and you just give them an iPad, and I mean, they're probably going to stop crying. That's so much dopamine, so much
Yeah.
games, there's so many games to play. It's fun. So it's almost like what we were talking about earlier, where parents want their children to like them. They want a solution to the problem right now. So that solution is maybe becoming these screens, but they're just causing loads more problems in the long run.
I went to visit a family a while ago, and their 2-year-old, the referral was that he didn't sleep. But I went to the family home, and the reason he didn't sleep was because he had an iPad till 3 o'clock in the morning. And,
Oh my God.
and the parents just not physically, emotionally couldn't remove it from him, because he got so upset that they couldn't tolerate his upset. So they just let him have it till he fell asleep. And of course he was shattered the next day. So it's too... And it's that balance again, Jack, isn't it? Like routines and boundaries and love. And like, you've got to be pretty strong to put in the routines and boundaries. You've got to be. There's nothing soft about being a gentle parent, being kind, because being kind's also doing all that stuff that makes your children unhappy.
That's a crazy balance.
Yeah.
So, we're nearing the end, but one of my last questions for you is, like, what advice would you give to parents to raise children? I mean, we've been going over this kind of the entire podcast, right? But like in a concise manner, what advice would you give to parents that want to raise more resilient and emotionally intelligent children?
I think it's make talking about feelings a normal part of your day. Develop something called confident disinterest, which basically means when your child is struggling with something that they need to do, so going into school, confident disinterest is, I know this is really hard for you and I love you very much, but it's going to be okay. Big kiss, goodbye. And that's confident disinterest. So you acknowledge the feeling, you boost them up, you give them some love, and you send them on the way. So talk about feelings, develop confident disinterest in the right scenarios, and look after yourself as a parent.
That's a good pillar. And 3 pillars. Yeah.
I think I could say about 20 more, but you want a concept. I think you've just got to get that balance. You've just got to get the balance right, which is not easy. It's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think the 3 things you mentioned from, like, obviously I don't know anything, that's why I wanted to talk to you, but I think that they're the highest, like, you get the highest return on investment from them. And I'm a big believer in whatever you're doing, you have a few things that if you put your energy there will do, like, the 80-20 rule, right? Like 80% of your effort, or 20% of your effort was responsible for 80% of the result. And so I think the 3 things you listed, from my understanding, are like that 80% of your outcome.
And I think one more thing, understand your child. So understand what type of child you've got. So do you have So children don't often, their emotions don't, the behaviour doesn't often match their emotions, as it doesn't really with adults. So you might have a little one who's really angry, but if you learn who they are as a person, you will get to know that that anger probably means that something awful's happening at school that they're upset about, but it comes out as anger. So try to understand your child, your little unique little person, because they haven't got the words to tell you what's going on. Their behaviour tells you what's going on. So get to know them.
Yeah, that's huge. All right. Deb, where can my audience find you?
I'm at Happy Child to Happy Parent on Instagram, and my website isn't up yet, but that will be exactly the same address, but I'll be launching that soon. And I'm also developing a 8-module digital program covering everything that we've been talking about today that people will be able to access in the future.
Awesome. I think that's so cool. I saw that. I'll link all of that. I'll link your Instagram below, and then once you get the website and the program and all that, I'll link that as well.
Oh, and I'm
That's
also
so
doing
cool.
a podcast called The Story of This Day with a girl called Shari O'Shaughnessy, an Irish girl, so that'll be coming soon as well.
Awesome. She's from London, right?
Yeah,
That's what you
yeah,
said. Cool.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on
Thank
today. It
you,
was
Jeff.
an amazing conversation. Yeah,
Been lovely meeting you and lovely speaking to you. Thank you for inviting us. I've really enjoyed it.
of course. Yeah. Thank you for listening to the Grateful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, it would mean the world to me if you could either share this episode with friends and family who you think would enjoy it, or leave a review down below on what I can do to make this better for you and for other listeners. All that would just help me be able to spread my message of gratitude and living a purposeful life. I hope you have a great day. See you soon.